Hello, I'm Carl Hayden Smith. I'm a cognitive scientist researching the relationship between technology and the human condition. My talk today is entitled An Ecology for the Re-Enchantment of Life. 60 years ago, Aldous Huxley stated that technology was made for men and not men for technology. But unfortunately, the development of recent social and scientific history has created a world in which man seems to be made for technology rather than the other way around. We have to start thinking about this problem very seriously to see how we can re-establish control over our own inventions. Huxley's dystopian novel Brave New World seems more applicable and relevant now than ever before. Today, technology is making it possible to enslave us en masse whilst we perceive ourselves to be free. We are now suffering from such a poverty of vision in every sense, as we are endlessly distracted by technologies that effectively turn off our depth perception, pattern recognition, and long-form critical thinking. How have we become so blind to the widespread effects of technology on our humanity? What is causing this loss of awareness? It's important to understand that not all of these problems are caused by our relationship with technology, and we will start by exploring some of the limits of our own perception. For instance, we never see ourselves as we actually are, because when we look into mirrors, our reflection is reversed front to back, creating a persistent distortion. And even when we use a true mirror to undo this distortion, the results look unreal. Furthermore, in shop changing rooms where our buying decisions are made, our perception is often intentionally manipulated by mirrors that are tilted to make us look skinnier than we actually are. Second, we don't ever hear ourselves as we actually sound because of the nature of our own physiology. Our perception of our own voice does not match the external reality. And when you consider the role of your voice that it plays in your identity, you can imagine the implications. Thirdly, neuroscience has taught us that we do not see things as they are, but as we are. Our brains are just prediction machines that can only process a fraction of the incoming sensory information, leaving the rest dependent on our previous gap-filling experiences. And finally, to compound all of this, our memory is notoriously partial and unreliable. So these four areas point us towards the realization that we're already living in a form of virtual reality. With the aim of understanding our perceptual limitations, I've been exploring how the media we commonly interact with is also limited. For example, a standard mobile phone camera only captures between 40 to 80 degrees of the scene it's trying to record. But in reality, we see in 180 degrees. So just like with the mirror examples, we can see this distortion is replicated. And then we have to live through that distortion. Now, if we apply these media limitations to social media, then it's easy to understand why social media leaves us feeling inadequate, as we often take the photoshopped or Instagrammed version of reality for reality itself. Now let's look at how that social media plugs into the tiny real estate of the mobile phone. Mobile phone devices also narrow our focus, reducing our awareness of what is going on around us, which leads us to living in a secondhand, zombified sort of way. Selfie face distortion, which is being enabled via these mobile phones, is also driving a reported 30% increase in plastic surgery. We are living in an increasingly mediated world, and as a result, we're becoming dependent on digital systems that create narrow perceptual channels and bottlenecks. This is compounded by the fact that the first bottleneck in our limited perceptual bandwidth is actually our own brain filtering out that sensory input. The point to note here is that we're already compromised by our physiology. So why would we want to use technologies that compound that problem? So in this talk, I'm going to offer an ecology of practices that aim to help us reclaim our humanity back from the machine while still retaining some of the advantages of good technologies. My first career involved reconstructing ancient buildings around the world using 3D modeling. Here is an example from Revo Abbey in Yorkshire. So what you're looking at here is a 3D reconstruction of the ruin. It took me 6 months to build. And what was fascinating is that I experienced a number of very surprising physiological side effects of doing the 3D modeling that made me realize the impact of media can have on our perception. The first of these was that my peripheral vision massively improved. Because it's such a large structure, I was actually able to become a better driver. I could see further down the road and saw more interactions. Secondly, I realized I was programming my dreams because I would dream about these structures when I went to sleep after a day's work. Thirdly, I realized I was inadvertently creating a number of memory palaces because the intricate 3D structures are actually baked into my subconscious even 10 years later. So let's unpack these three powerful effects to see how transferable these practices potentially are. First, let's start with an interactive exercise. So what I want you to do now is to come into presence by looking at the middle of this image, at that tree at the middle of the image. And recognize that this is your narrow focus that you're indoctrinated into through your mobile phone, the small real estate of your mobile phone. And now just try and broaden your field of view. So start to take in the whole image at once and realize that this is you practicing your peripheral vision. And then I want you to take it further and actually look to the sides of the computer that you're looking at and take in the room that you're in, and try and expand your eyesight so that you're actually taking in your full 180 degrees. And then realize that your body is also within your field of view. So start to take in your own body in the image as one continuous view. And then start to sense internally in your body, so your heartbeat, the breath, and realize that all of this is within that one field of view. So when you're actually interacting with information in the future, try and do this exercise so that you actually calm down your physiology, that you minimize the effects of information overload, and you really start to savor and integrate information that you're engaging with. So regain a sense of the passing of time and start to actually try and, live rather than just exist. So this demo is courtesy of Tony Langford from the Fovotech team, who specialize in making more natural media, which, as we talked about before, maps onto our own physiology. So continuing the unpacking with the second part. So from 3D modeling, I had the unexpected transferable skill of being able to program my dreams, which led me on to look at how much perceptual flexibility can be developed inside a dream space. Lucid dreamers report that training can be done with 4 times more efficacy inside a dream. For instance, one of my friends practices Tai Chi, but he noticed at the beginning of his practice that he was floating off the ground, so he had to apply gravity. So applying context as well as the content gives you these extra skills that you wouldn't have to do in reality. So I also practice peripheral vision exercises inside my dreams, which again gives me these extra dimensions inside the space and allows me actually to bring more back in terms of retention of the memories. So moving on to an elaboration of the memory palace concept. To describe what a memory palace is to look back to the Greek orators who didn't rely on the written word and instead could recite epic poems from memory alone. And they achieved this by creating a piece of virtual architecture in their heads, and then they would actually store remembered information inside that virtual model. My own 3D modeling has given me this spatial literacy as a transferable skill, which has resulted in the construction of a number of different memory palaces. The first application of my memory palace was to place my 2D PhD within a 3D reconstruction of the walls of Revo Abbey. This was a revelation as it enabled me to see the different parts of my PhD in a brand new way. The parts were literally in dialogue depending on where they were placed in the building. The second memory palace is the record collection you can see behind me. And it's a memory palace because I bought every single one of those records in a physical space. Each one has a story behind it. And also I know, because I want to play the records, where they are on the shelf. So it's giving me these abilities to spatialize my life. And the third one I'll mention is my diary. So I've written a journal for 30 years, and I've also turned my life into architecture because I can take cross sections through that diary. I can look back at this day last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before and get 30 different me's communicating again. So I'm lifting insight off the page because I'm turning my life from point of view into field of view, getting this lateral thinking, gaining insights by taking a higher order perspective on my daily single perspectives. So in summary of this section, I developed my peripheral vision exercises, the ability to program my dreams, and also create memory palaces just from one technology, which is 3D modeling on a 2D screen. So this just goes to show that the right kind of engagement with technology can create real world transferable skills with real world tangible benefits. Now let's move on to our next interactive exercise. You can try this exercise at leisure when you're outside, but for now I'm just going to run through it. Which types of physical space enchant you? Recollect the types of places where you come alive. What landscapes get you into a flow state? Notice what environments expand and contract your sense of time. Then try to explore what it is about that the space enables for that. Notice, for instance, when you have access to the horizon, how this reinforces your ability to practice your peripheral vision. Does this looking across as opposed to from also enable new forms of thinking? Finally, to regain your agency over your perception, try to enchant the space itself. Be as present as you can as you imprint upon your space. And now try programming your environment with your ideation. At the end of this process, you may discover that you have turned these enchanted places into memory palaces. The next challenge would be to try the same process with your own body to see if you can also turn that into a memory palace. Remember, constructing memory palaces is most effective when you know the place inside and out. These are experimental exercises which are designed to reconnect you with your physical environment in an embodied way. So what we mean by embodied cognition is being multimodal, using both digital and analog methods at the same time. Through handwriting, I am better able to generate ideas and also retain those ideas. In other words, it's not just what I write that matters, but how I write it. So I use the digital and the analog to reinforce each other. Another aspect of embodied cognition is optic flow, which is simply the flow of things going past you as you walk or run or ride a bike. Our history was saturated with this locomotive optic flow, but now that's gone for a lot of us because of lockdown. Instead, what we have is this very static vision that keeps us locked in. So in summary, we are locked in multiple times in the form of the following stack. Initially within our own perceptual limitations, then by our image media, then across our social media, then into our mobile screen-based technologies. And on top of that, we are literally locked into our lack of bodily movement and optic flow. So the major question of this talk is, can technology help us break out of this predicament? I would argue that technology alone is not enough. We have to revive the analog skills that we're rapidly losing, largely because of the digital, whilst at the same time harness the benefits of the technology that is already here and rapidly arriving. In order to explain this, let's look at the difference between transhumanism and hyperhumanism. So transhumanism requires us to become dependent on technology, which in turn subverts our ability to develop the skills for ourselves. In contrast, hyperhumanism uses technology just as a catalyst for developing our own innate human abilities. So the final practice will take us beyond the human altogether in order to practice what I call perceptual diversity. Humans of the past were much more intimate with their ecosystems, and if we are to survive the climate changes before us, we must reacquaint ourselves with a more than human life that lives beyond the concrete and computers that define modernity. David Sartori, an ecologist. How can we best create synergies between technology and nature? How can we sense like a mycelium network or a forest? Mixed reality gives us the ability to overlay a digital layer over the world. This could also provide us with a new form of X-ray vision, which would allow us to look into the invisible processes in nature that we as humans do not usually have access to. If we could visualize how trees use the mycelial networks to share resources literally underneath our feet, we would immediately get access to this living intelligence as it generates mutually beneficial relationships. We would witness and have a chance to understand how nature operates. The key question again is, would such a perspective shift enabled through technology actually help us to reprogram our associations with the natural world in order to enable systemic behavior change? It's a big question. Mixed reality also has the potential to put us not only back into our bodies, but back into the world, reactivating our peripheral vision and our optic flow. We are seeing this trend towards spatial computing everywhere, and it will be the next evolution of personal computing. However, mixed reality also has the power to degrade reality, much like computer animation has the potential to degrade the imagination. We must always remember that we can only ask the questions that we have the ability to imagine. And once you have augmented your reality, it can be very hard to live without that augmentation. But can we go further? Can a combination of an innate imagination and built technology be the answer? Can the two work synergistically? The hope for this is, I believe, at the core of our ecology for the re-enchantment of life. For instance, the app that allows you to grow a virtual tree, if you don't touch your phone whilst the tree is growing virtually, a real tree is planted. And how about we use our physical space to undo the damage caused by our technology? Try and demarcate your space. For instance, I've got a friend that has an analog only upstairs and a digital downstairs. So in summary, the example ecology outlined in this talk contains some of the following guidelines or design patterns, which can be applied to your own. Number one, create interventions that require the navigation of unfamiliar territory. Number two, adapt to alternative points of view in order to expand our perceptual abilities. Number three, increasing our perceptual augmentation leads to our expanded capacity to be in the world. And to conclude, I've attempted to outline an ecology of practice for the re-enchantment of life. These initial practices are really only intended to encourage you to make your own. By generating an ecology, we build in resilience and gain the potential to expand our consciousness literacy. Through building collectively, we can create a real testament to the imagination, instead of being fed by the algorithm. Remember to turn your ecology into a memory palace to enable cross-pollination. Let's reinvigorate and reignite the senses we've lost in order to return us to that childlike sense of wonder. The full dynamic range of our existence depends on it. Thank you very much.